Greetings, Clariphiles. What we're going to do in this video is do a little follow-up to the previous videos where I've been demonstrating testing reeds and playing reeds and evaluating reeds and so on and so forth. And in this, we're going to take a step back and do something a little more basic and just talk about exactly what's happening in the balancing process and exactly what the reed is doing on the facing of the mouthpiece that I think will be very helpful for you to know. If you're interested in that, hang on, it's coming right up. So what's happening with the reed when it's actually in action, okay? Well, before we actually take a look at that, let's do a little review in case somebody has missed it. Let's talk about what the reed is. Now, in William Stubbins' book, he talks about the reed being a spring form. And I don't think he elaborates much beyond that, but the fact is the reed is a complex spring form. And I gave you a drawing, I think, in one of the videos previously of a diving board. And the diving board now and what spring forms do, by the way, is they transfer energy. So energy rolls up and down the diving board, and the diving board, if it's an even thickness, then it gives you a linear transference of that energy until finally the diving board reaches a stable point. Now, if the diving board were not an even thickness all the way, if it had weak spots in it or something, then you would see some real terrible perturbations and deviations, and the diving board would not vibrate efficiently at all, because when you hit the weak spot, the energy would move faster, and then when it hit the same thickness, it was move slower. So the transfer rate would be interrupted in terms of its speed. Well, now that's a linear spring form, but the clarinet is actually a complex spring form, so that energy travels up and down it as a spring form, faster on the outside and then slower on the inside. I think that's pretty obvious. No one needs to say, hey, that's revelatory. No, it's obvious. So the fact is that when the reed is vibrating on the facing of the mouthpiece, it's acting as a spring form, but not a metal spring form, but something that you're turning into something that's an artifice, actually. You're turning it into a very real spring form by the way you adjust it and by the way you balance it. Now, by balanced reeds, we mean that the response, the spring form response on left and right sides is largely identical all the way up and down. So the ears move at the same rate on the outside, and then on the inside, then they move at the same rate, but at a very shorter trajectory, because you have more resistance and more mass in the middle. I've done a little, a little animation here so you can see how that works. So that's the way a mouthpiece or a reed that is symmetrically, beautifully balanced to fit a symmetrical mouthpiece, that's the way it actually works. Okay, so that's what happens when a reed is beautifully balanced symmetrically on a symmetrical facing mouthpiece. Now, what happens when the reed is not well balanced? Say one side of the reed, the left side or the right side, is harder than the other. Well, behind your nose, you can only put essentially one composite energy onto the reed, which would be a combination of embouchure and air pressure. And what happens then is that because you only have one composite energy applied to the reed, essentially you have two different responses, two different resonances, two different resonance decays. And the way you can know this with the reed is when you put the reed on the mouthpiece, you feel a lot of resistance and a lot maybe of noise in the reed. But even if a reed say, is maybe a soft reed, it can be very unbalanced. And you can tell that if you play a forte and then diminuendo, and you don't change anything behind your nose, just simply diminuendo. As you diminuendo, if the reed is unbalanced, you will continue to hear the sound on one ear, and on the other ear you're going to hear. And what is happening is the reed now is not producing vibration. It's not transforming the air into a musical sound and vibration. And the clarinet then becomes just simply on that ear a megaphone for the air. So like that and at the same time. So normally your response to that is instantaneous and reflexive. You don't want that sound, that breathiness in your sound. So what do? You go, and you crunch it down on the reed and force it to produce a clear sound. Well, this changed the shape and resonance and all kinds of things about that, as well as the pitch. But you're forced to do that to clarify the sound. Or you have another option, which means you can increase your air and you have to play everything louder in order to get a clear sound, because your air is actually forcing the unbalanced part of the reed, the harder part of the reed, to vibrate and make a sound until the air force is decreased to a certain point that hard ear will no longer play. So, therefore, then you have to transfer that energy that was making the reed respond from your air. You have to transfer that to embouchure pressure by crunching down on the reed and making it vibrate, okay? What's happening is the reed is beginning to undulate so that their sequence of closure is not, the left and right sequence of closure is not the same. So that's why you're hearing the air, but the reed also is structurally doing this. The reed is not made to do that. The fibers are made to do that, to vibrate front to back like that, okay? And when the reed is unbalanced and it starts to undulate, it's structurally being torn apart, so to speak. And reeds that play like that don't last very long. But what's more, that imbalance ruins your playing mechanics, because you should not have to be closing like that to force the reed to produce a clear sound or force it to respond. Now, what you hear in the low register is compounded as you play high, because an unbalanced reed up high will maybe not exhibit the breathiness that it would with long pipe notes, but what will happen is that it simply won't respond. You'll put air into the horn, you'll play, say, an E in the clarion register, and you want to slur to a high C sharp or slur to a high D, doesn't respond, because the hard side doesn't vibrate fast enough because of the air. So you have to change your air and again force that ear to respond. So you don't have an even placement of your air and air pressure between the lower clarion note to the altissimo note because of the imbalance. Now let's say you have a perfectly balanced reed, okay? Beautifully balanced, symmetrical, okay? Couldn't be better, you know? So what happens then? Well, you put that on the mouthpiece, but if the mouthpiece rails are not symmetrical and the tip isn't centered, then a crooked mouthpiece with a symmetrical reed will again result in a mismatch, and therefore the reed, instead of it being imbalanced, the imbalance in the inequities in the mouthpiece facing again causes the reed to have to undulate and twist on the facing, and that causes you behind your nose to do dumb and stupid things with your air and embouchure that you should never have to do if you have a beautifully balanced reed on a beautifully symmetrical mouthpiece. Now, I know some people play asymmetrical mouthpieces. I pity them because it makes life so much harder. When you balance You know, there's only one straight, right? When you balance a reed straight up, and it's on a mouthpiece that's symmetrical and everything, there's only one straight, but there are an infinite number of crookeds. So essentially, if you're going to even approximate an acceptable balance in a reed to fit it to a crooked-facing mouthpiece, you're going to have to build a calculated skewity, a calculated imbalance in the material of the reed to match as a kind of photographic negative of the imbalance in the mouthpiece. And still, even then, as you play higher, you're going to have hesitations and insecurities in trying to attack, especially above the staff, and it gets even worse as you go higher and higher. So there you are trying to play the high register. It's not responding to your air. You're crunching down to try to make the sound, and you get the sound out, but it sounds terrible because you're having to put so much embouchure pressure on the sound gets thin and bright and shallow and all that. That doesn't happen if you have a beautifully balanced reed on a beautifully symmetrical facing mouthpiece. And it's very easy, by the way, to build reeds that are interchangeably playing on a symmetrical mouthpiece because there's only one straight. So you can build a reed that has more resistance, but yet is well balanced, so it'll respond and produce a clearer sound. And you can produce a lighter reed that will produce a beautiful, clear sound and respond evenly. I have like 5 or 6 mouthpieces, or 5 or 6 reeds that I can just put on my mouthpiece, and they all play with a subtly different color and a different, maybe a different resistance, but the response will be even all the way up and down because it's easy to fit straight to straight. It's easy to fit balance to balance. It's easy to fit symmetry to symmetry. But when there's a skewity either in the reed or in the mouthpiece facing, you're going to have an awful time trying to get the mouthpiece just placed just right so that it sort of approximates maybe something a really well-balanced reed will really do. I've considered that I have a pretty good control over reeds, pretty good mastery over reed finishing and all that. And I'll have to say, to be candid with you, that with a crooked-facing mouthpiece, I cannot balance a reed to a minimum acceptability. It's just that simple in terms of its performance. Playing asymmetrical facings and crooked, unbalanced reeds is the best way to hamper your progress, to make everything more difficult, response, resonance, clarity, the whole shooting match, right? And to make you work much harder and to probably have to end up cutting yourself, cutting your lip, constantly biting, and it's a kind of vicious circle because the worse it is, the worse it gets, and so on and so forth. Even to the point that I've seen people that are used to having to play that way, that when they actually play a mouthpiece and reed that really works well, they kill it. Their mechanics are so screwed up behind their nose that they can't really recognize a good facing and a well-responding reed when they run into it, because before they ever put any air into the horn, they've killed the reed like this, which you should not have to do. Okay? If a reed is beautifully balanced on a mouthpiece, you should be able to simply seal upper lip and lower lip. I play double lip, but I use both. It is get an equal seal and an equal, say, pressure all the way around, and put air in, and the reed should speak, produce a very clear sound. So that's why I'm very much an advocate of symmetrical mouthpieces and symmetrical facings in the reeds, because it makes life so much easier. You never have reed problems, and in any particular instant when you have to perform, you have all kinds of choices. Well, I think I'm going to play a little lighter reed here because this very, the room is very kind of a little on the dull side and everything. I want a little vibrance in the sound. Or maybe I want a little more beef in the sound. I've got a good resonant room and stuff. So then you can put up on a more comfortably playing mouthpiece, comfortably I mean not in terms of your mechanics, because it should be comfortable, period, but comfortable in terms of being able to get the feedback that you need to continue to play without, again, feeling the need to do panicky, stupid things behind your nose. And finally, there is the issue of simply how you finish the reed. And then we had to go back to that original drawing of the diving boards, and the diving board that has this weak spot in it, right? These perturbations, as you see these deviations like in the diving board, that really messes up the transfer of energy. You can do this by your handwork, by the method you use, generally scraping with a knife or moving from back to front like that. Your handwork is as such that it inevitably produces some deviations and perturbations. So let's say you're balancing a reed, and the reed is heavy on the left side. Okay, it's heavy on the left side. So, okay, I'm going to get my knife and I'm going to go here. I'm going to scrape or sand or whatever I'm going to do, and I'm going to equalize the mass on the left side to the right side so that they play with the same basic resistance. Okay, well, you do that. I did that. I can't tell you how many times I've done that. And so I do my side-to-side test, and bam, the right side plays great. Then I do the left side, and now I've improved the resistance balance. So they play largely the same. But there's something wrong with the left side because it just doesn't seem to have the life and the ring and the energy. Yeah, the resistance, yeah, it plays a lot the same. But the response has been degraded because of the inequities of my handwork. And that happened to me over and over, and I couldn't, for the longest time, I couldn't explain it. But I do have an explanation now, and that is that with that kind of handwork, scraping like that, and the variations, the vagaries of your hand movement and where you contact the material on the reed and all that stuff, when you essentially produce those deviations, you degrade the response. So you can equalize the resistance because resistance has to do mostly with mass, okay? So you can balance the mass, okay, and that's good. But if in the process you degrade the contour, what you're going to do is degrade the response. So that's why I developed the ATG system, because that system virtually eliminates the vagaries of this hand movement right here. It prevents you from hitting the reed differently because you're always approaching it from the flat surface of the glass and pushing. So you're always producing a smooth, even contour with no deviations. And that's why the system works so well. If you work it and you practice a little bit, and I mean just practice a little bit, it doesn't take years of struggling and effort and all that to learn how to balance and test reeds at all with this system. When I created the system, it worked so well. And the process was so simple that for an entire month, I couldn't make my mind accept the results. I thought, how can the results be this easy and this simple? It's like, and I couldn't show it to anyone until after a month of testing reeds 1 week or finishing reeds and then testing them the next week to see if I wasn't crazy. Well, I found out I'm not crazy. Well, at least I'm not crazy about that. I may be crazy about some other things. I think there's a little craziness in all of us, but not about reeds. That was empirically verified. So anyway, besides the symmetry and the symmetry of the mouthpiece, symmetry of the reed, learning how to test and all that, the means you use of finishing that reed are really critical, okay? You can spend years developing, monstrous skills scraping the reed, or you can use my ATG system and get a great result with a lot less effort and in a lot shorter time. Now, yeah, I'm pushing this and I'm promoting it, but, you know, the reason I'm doing it for your benefit. If you don't know this system, if you haven't used this system, it's cheap, it's inexpensive. We made sure that it would be inexpensive so that almost anyone who needed to finish reeds and who wanted good reeds could have them, okay? So, to review, we've talked about what happens with the reed in terms of its transfer of energy from side to side, what happens when there's not an equal mass on the reed, or what happens when the mouthpiece is skewed, and how that makes the reed undulate and basically structurally tears it apart. And then finally, the critical thing is the method you use to make that reed actually work. Okay, that's a lot of words, and I thank you if you hung on to the bitter end. So I would appreciate any comments that you have, any questions that you have here. And if you like this video, then subscribe and give me a like down there. If you don't like this video, I'm telling you, take your venom out on this presentation by hitting the dislike button twice. That'll show me